So about 13 years ago, I found myself living in the back of a 13-passenger van that I'd bought from a church for $1,200. I had it parked behind a climbing gym in downtown Oakland, and that was my home for the better part of a year after my fiance had kicked me out of the apartment. She had called off the wedding and said, "I don't want to be with you anymore." And I didn't have a lot of prospects in my life at that point because I had about $80,000 of debt between student loans and credit cards. And I just had like no real prospects in life because up to that point, I was a pseudo professional rock climber, which is like the worst way to make money in the world. So I didn't have any earning potential. I had no savings. I had nowhere to live really. And so things weren't looking terribly great. But over the next 13 years, things would go through some pretty interesting evolution cycles. I learned this game of business. I got into my very first business with a friend when he came to me and he suggested we start a window washing company. And then I went and started writing books, science fiction and fantasy, and did a bunch of other things along the way. Had a climbing gym, had a manufacturing company, built a real estate portfolio that at its peak was worth about $100 million. And along the way, I lost it all, filed bankruptcy. And so I've had some ups, I've had some downs, and I want to share with you some of the single biggest lesson from each one of those endeavors, from each one of those businesses, each one of those phases, so that you can get my lessons without the scars. Hopefully apply them to your life to get the results without necessarily getting all the chaos in the middle. So the very first one, let's talk about the window washing company. So when I was in the back of that van, like I was not entrepreneurial as a kid. Like I had never had a lemonade stand. The idea of selling newspapers to people, like it was not my skill set. I was very introverted. Never even crossed my mind, this game of business, despite the fact that my dad was a businessman. Well, when you're at rock bottom, you don't have a lot of options, and so you're willing to take risks. You think, okay, what do I have to lose, right? So when a buddy said, "Hey, let's start this window washing company," I was like, okay, let's give that a shot. And very quickly, what I learned was a very simple lesson that has served me profoundly well in all my businesses, and it will serve you well, is that the more hands you shake, the more money you will make. So the way we made money with that business is we went and got window washing tools from the local supply store. And we just went and knocked on doors, all day long, asking people, working on our door-to-door sales process, if we could wash their windows. And there's just a direct correlation between how many doors you knocked on and how many opportunities, how many clients you would ultimately sign. It was a direct correlation. It wasn't this compounding thing because, if you're not out there knocking on doors on Tuesday, you're not going to get any sales on Tuesday, regardless of how many doors you knocked on Monday. So every day you have to start from zero, start that flywheel going again. And we eventually learned how to create more of a compounding flywheel within our business to implement like ads and recurring subscription models and organic content so that people would keep coming back. And it wasn't always directly tied to how many doors we knocked on. But right there, regardless of what business you have, the more people that you talk to, the more hands you shake, the more money you will make. So sending more cold EMs, it sends more cold emails, calling more people and asking for referrals. The more conversations that you have, ultimately, the more money you will make in that business. It's just that simple. From there, I sold that business after we crossed the $1 million mark, maybe about 12 months, 14. It was more like 18 months later that I exited the business. Anyway, I exited that by selling it back to the employees at that point, let them buy into it. So this wasn't life-changing money, but for me it was, right? Like living in the back of a van, suddenly you have like a a low six-figure exit and you're like, oh, that's pretty cool. Well, the next thing I did was I was writing science fiction and fantasy during that time. It was kind of like happening at the same moment because a number of years earlier, before my fiance had left me, I sat down with her parents right before I asked her to marry me, and I asked them for permission to marry their daughter. And her mom just looked at me and was like, "Well, what are you gonna do to provide for our daughter?" Right? Like this was before I was living in the van, before everything had fallen apart. But even she could recognize like I didn't have great life prospects at that point. Well, coming off the back of that conversation, I decided I was going to show her. I was going to prove her wrong, and so I thought to myself, who makes a lot of money? Right? Like who could make money if I want to emulate that? And I was a nerd at that point. I was reading a lot of science fiction, a lot of fantasy. And so the two people that came to mind were Stephen King, J.K. Rowling. Like, just shows like how out of touch with reality I was. I was like, I'll be the next J.K. Rowling, right? So but credit to young Anthony. I sat down the next day and I started writing. And I wrote 3,000 words every single day for the next year, which is over 1,000,000 words. And about a year and a half later, I had my first book published. And over the last 13 years, I've published over a dozen best-selling books now across science fiction, fantasy, and we also have written in real estate and personal development and other genres as well. But the interesting thing about that world is there are a lot of really talented writers. You hear about like the starving artists all the time. But the lesson here is that the reason that most artists are starving is because they refuse to open their mouth. It's crazy. When I started writing, I recognized I wasn't the best writer, but I was going to be the best marketer. I was going to be the most vocal. I was going to let the most people know, because I'd been building the window washing, right? Like, the more doors you knock on, the more you will sell. And so I was like, the more people that know I'm writing books, the more I will sell. And it was just fascinating to me. Like, I was running in these writer circles, and like these super talented people that were just terrible at marketing, or they just refused to do the marketing. And so as a result, their work just wasn't taking off. They were waiting to be discovered rather than going out and saying, hey, world, here I am. And so the lesson here is that most starving artists are starving because they refuse to open their mouths. Same with you. Like, in your business, where are you refusing to open your mouth and just make the ask to let people know, your friends, your family, how they can help you and support you? Being very specific with that and saying, listen, I offer tax planning services for 7-figure entrepreneurs. Cindy, my sister, she doesn't need that. But Cindy, if you ever meet somebody who is running their own business, here's how you can help. Just refer them over to me. Give them this email and tell them that, say this thing, and I'll give them this discount. Be very clear about how people can help you in pursuit of your goal. That's just one example, but it's crazy to me how people have never sat down and had these conversations with the people closest to them and be like, here's how you can help support me. So if you're starving right now, open your goddamn mouth. Number 3. The third business I want to tell you about. So I had a number of successes, right? We had the window washing, we had the media, we had some other things along the way. But about 4 years into my journey, I moved back to Minnesota, and my friends, they had started this rock climbing gym specifically designed for young youth competitive climbers, kids that wanted to go on to compete at the nationals, compete at the Olympic level. In fact, in the very first Olympics in Tokyo, we had one of 2 American climbers. We had trained her since she was just a little child. So pretty cool for coming from Minnesota. However, that business model was fundamentally screwed up, right? And so my friends, they came to me and they're like, hey, listen, we're not making any money here and we're running out of time. Can you come and help us? And everything I had touched up to that point had turned to gold. So I thought, yeah, I got this. I can help with you with this. This is no problem. And it turns out, like, it was a hell of a problem. Like, I could not turn it around. Like, despite my efforts, despite like all the skill I thought I had, like, what really came to light was that I had gotten lucky before and I'd mistaken it for skill. So that's lesson number 1, is like, don't be stupid enough to mistake luck for skill, because that'll kill you in the long run. And that really did me in. But in that particular business, the lesson I want to share with you is that it doesn't matter how hard you row if you're in the wrong boat. At the end of the day, if you're in the biggest boat in the world, but you have a tiny little paddle, like, you're not even touching the water, and vice versa. If you're in this tiny little rowboat, but you got this giant motor on it, like, the thing is just going to sink it, right? So you have to pair the right motor with the right boat. And what we found in that one is that fundamentally the business model, the boat, had a big ass hole in the middle of it. Like, no matter what paddle you put in there, no matter how hard you rowed, the thing was shaking on water. And that was fundamentally because it had a broken pricing structure, had a broken subscription model. Like, you cannot outwork a bad market. And we were fundamentally in a bad market. And by the time we realized that and we started to pivot and adjust, it was already too late. We were out of resources and we had to shut up shop. And one of the hardest conversations I've ever had is sitting down with all these kids, had turned this gym into their home, sitting down with them and their parents and saying, like, this thing is going away. So that's lesson. Yeah, that was hard. Next is, on the back end of that business, as I was winding that down and shutting up that shop, another friend, he had started this manufacturing company a number of years earlier. And he had decided that he wanted to go big time with it. Up to that point, he was doing like $300,000 a year of top line revenue with like a really small team. And he's like, hey, come help me take this to the next level. And I was like, I don't know anything about manufacturing. I don't know anything about polyurethanes, about metals. I don't know anything about woods. I don't know anything about importing. I don't know anything about supply chains. I don't know anything about anything. But the lesson here, and this is a lesson that my buddy that was running that business, he taught me. He didn't teach it to me specifically, but just observing him taught me this, is that everything is figureoutable. Everything. One of the great gifts of my life, I think, is that I've had the opportunity to do business with this guy, my close friend Ryan, who has like this unnatural, supernatural ability to just figure things out, put himself into situations where you're like, what are you doing? Like, why would we think that we could, produce our own polyurethanes? We don't know anything about polyurethane sciences or fluid dynamics. We don't know anything about anything. Why would you think we could do this? And he's not the smartest person in the world. He's just the best at figuring things out. And so like, whatever you're doing in your business, you probably don't know what you don't know. And the things that you don't know, you still don't know how to do it. You're like, okay, I don't know anything about finance. I don't know anything about marketing or sales, but I do know how to do this one thing, right? That's okay. Just realize that everything in life and in business is figureoutable, especially nowadays with AI. Like, honestly, if we had AI 10 years ago when we started growing that business aggressively, it would have changed the landscape, because suddenly you have the answers to everything. Your ability to get results now is dictated by your ability to ask the right questions, right? Not necessarily in knowing the answer. And so that is the number one lesson from that endeavor, is that everything is figureoutable. From that business, we went on to start a real estate private equity firm and started bringing in private capital to go and acquire multifamily real estate. And we, at our peak, were valued about $100 million. And that ended in a tragic experience with a business partner that did all sorts of nefarious things that ultimately hurt a lot of people and sunk that ship. And I talked about that in another video on the main YouTube channel. We'll link to that somewhere around here so you can go get that full story. But the number one lesson I want to share from that experience was, don't risk what you need for what you want. Don't risk what you need for what you want. When I got into that business, I didn't need more money. I didn't need more. I didn't need to bring on investors. I thought it would be fun. I thought it was an enjoyable thing. I thought this will be a great way to continue growing. But the problem with leverage with real estate is that it cuts both ways. It can grow really quickly, but it can also hurt you really, really badly. And I got to experience the other side of that, which is what happens when the whole thing goes to zero and you've personally guaranteed around $40 million of real estate, right? So don't risk what you need, which is, the basics of life, the money that you had, for what you want. Like, create structures, be really clear about identifying, okay, how much do I need? What do I want? And don't go for things just for the sake of going for them. Like I wish somebody would have sat me down. It probably wouldn't have worked. Probably wouldn't have mattered. Like, when we're young, like, there's certain lessons that you have to experience, you have to go through. You can't just be told. So the only way to learn them is having to have gone through them. And that's one of those lessons. I can tell you this, and you'll still probably end up doing it like I did. So good luck. Last lesson. When I look back on like all my business, monetary, financial success, it's funny that like the most money I've actually made isn't from the businesses. It's from investments. It's from angel investments in particular. So I started angel investing in around like 2016, 2017, maybe. And it was off the back of this idea that you read about in The Richest Man in Babylon, which is all about like financial management. And he says, treat each dollar, each coin, as though it's a worker, and its job is to go out into the field and bring back another worker with it. So each dollar you put to work, it comes back with another dollar, and then that $2 goes to work and you get another $4, right? Cool concept. So I started applying that first with like investing in the S&P 500 and index funds, and then getting into real estate, and then expanding that even further into real estate by using, outside capital. And at the same time that I was taking outside capital for my endeavors, I was taking my capital and I was giving it to other operators for them to put into their operations. And with angel investing, it is very high risk. But the idea here that I want to share with you is the idea of barbell soldiers. So Nassim Taleb talks about this in all of his books, which is the barbell investment strategy, which is you have capped downside with practically unlimited upside, right? So the idea here is if you have barbell soldiers, you're finding investment opportunities that have cap downsides. The soldier can die, but the soldier can't cost you 5 other soldiers, right? That's great. But the soldier could come back with not just another soldier, but he could come back with 10,000 soldiers. And that's angel investing, right? If you think about real estate investing, and specifically what I was doing with multifamily, like that was the reverse. I was actually asymmetric, but in the wrong way. There's a barbell risk, but in the opposite direction, which is you could bring the soldier in, and because I personally guaranteed things, that one soldier could also cost me a lot more soldiers when he died, right? And at the most with real estate, like that soldier is generally going to come back, and he's going to bring back like 4 or 5 different soldiers, but he was never going to bring back 500. Like there was no asymmetric infinite upside when it comes to real estate investing. However, when you're investing in, say, tech startups, right, you put in your $1, and that could come back as 100. Can't get those returns in real estate. Now, I'm not saying that you should go do that, because the thing is, like, it is very risky. Like, you're more likely to lose your one soldier in that investment strategy than you are in some of the other ones, especially like an index fund, where you're probably not going to lose your one soldier in an index fund. He's probably going to come back with 2 soldiers over the course of the next 7 years. But for me, I just got really fortunate that I placed a lot of bets across a lot of different industries, a lot of different operators, and most of them failed, but a couple of them hit really, really big. And it's just really interesting that when you play that game, like, it's not surprising when you know that over the last 100 years, some of the most money that was ever made has been from tech startups and tech tycoons, but then also financiers. So like the Warren Buffetts of the world, people who invest into these businesses that then compound and blow up. And so the lesson there is that as you are starting to make money and you're trying to figure out where to put it, think about barbell soldiers. Investing into things that have limited downside, but potentially a lot of upside, or just, very secure, like, I'm going to risk 1 soldier, I'm going to get 2 soldiers, like in the instance of a index fund or a bond. So those are some lessons I got really lucky, kind of fell into that one. Wasn't really part of a strategic plan that I set out with from the beginning, but in the end, it worked out pretty well. So those are some of the stories. So those are some of the lessons learned over the last 13, 14 years or so since I started my entrepreneurial journey. Hopefully one of these lessons resonates with you and can help you on your journey. Let me know down in the comments if there was one of these stories in particular that hit home with you. I'd love to hear from you guys, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.